Very well, we continue with the debate on the 24th Amendment, the government plan. Next listed to speak, I have Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I just wanted to make a very brief point. Sometimes it is important to state the obvious somewhat, but my contribution is simply this. Lager louts and beer bellies. Sir, they are two public health issues that relate to the consumption of beer, and therefore I would ask the remaining minister from the Treasury and Exchequer Department, who has yet to speak, to please explain to the Assembly where is the evidence for removing both beer and cider from their duties. And that's all I have to say, sir. Thank you.
Very much indeed. Senator Pallett.
Thank you, sir. Like Senator Moore, I can't see how the argument's been made for just freezing duty on beer and cider. Why only beer and cider? Deputy Morrell has made the point already. If this is some sort of concession to the working man, and again, I'm not going to go into stereotypes. What about women? Where's the fairness and the equitable side of this, please? I don't deny, because I've been involved with the alcohol and alcohol strategy prior to leaving government.
I'm sorry, Senator, I think we've lost you.
Sorry, I must have just. Am I back?
Yes, you are back.
As I was saying, so I think more needs to be done to promote. I don't deny more needs to be done to promote better health and less alcohol consumption, but it needs to be done in a fair and equitable way. We accept but what I think we need to accept is that levels of drinking and harmful levels of drinking, I think, have improved over recent years. So it has been working to some degree, but there's been comments made today, and the previous speaker, Senator Moore, has said it. Where is the evidence to back up some of what has been said? The alcohol and licensing strategy is now 7 years old. This government's had an opportunity to update that. It's also an opportunity to look at some of the issues around the alcohol licensing law, but has failed to do so. I think if the government had been serious about looking at this issue, then they would have got to grips with all of these issues. And by actually looking at the licensing strategy again, I think we would have had the evidence to back up some of what was said today, but that work just hasn't been done. Again, there's a statement in the reports around health officers identifying spirits as being a type of alcohol consumed by most younger people. Where is that evidence in Jersey that is actually the case? Anecdotally, it might be wider afield, but I want to know what the evidence is on Ireland, not what anecdotal evidence from around the world is. Again, to be fair to government, sir, ministers have tried to be consistent to some degree over this pandemic in trying to support the hospitality industry in what had been a very difficult time. But we're neither out of this pandemic or over the effects of Brexit. I think both remain a threat to the hospitality industry in the short term. And although I agree with raising the impo duty, 2.5% is below RPI, and I believe is a concession to the industry while they get to terms with some of the issues that they're currently struggling with. I mean, the JHA have commented to states members on various issues in their letter, but they have endured several years of damaging duty increases. Those increases were there for a purpose. They were there to improve health and lessen alcohol consumption. But we do have a tourism sector in the islands. We do have a hospitality sector that we want to be successful. And we need to balance that up. We need to balance the economy with health concessions. And another issue, which again Senator Moore brings up, is around antisocial behaviour. All these issues need to be dealt with in the whole and not singly. Another issue they bring up is around the potential for more duty-free being brought into the island. I mean, that again is damaging, I think, to the taxpayer. It's also damaging to people's health. So I think we need to, again, we don't have evidence on how much people are beginning to bring in or how much more people are bringing in. It all needs to be evidence-based. Again, one other issue I'm going to bring up, and that's around ignoring the FPP. What they've said is that revenue-raising steps, including higher taxes, impose a burden and would not be appropriate at present. They've also said that the Technology Fund is not appropriate at the current time either. Are we going to ignore panels that we put in to provide us with advice, not just once, but twice? For me, that's not what we should be doing. We should be looking at the professional advice we're getting and relying on that advice. So I would urge members to support the amendment, which we believe is a fair way forward. It's not. We didn't bring or attempt to bring no increase in duty, because we do realise that it's important to keep the opportunity to raise more tax, and it's important at this particular time. But I think it is important that it's balanced, and it doesn't do harm to an industry that's already been through a really difficult time. So I would urge members to support this amendment.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy St Warren.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I find I cannot support the scrutiny panel's amendment, and I would urge members to reject it for reasons that I'll explain. As stated by myself and my predecessors as ministers, and evidenced many times through our local statistics, Jersey has high rates of alcohol consumption and alcohol-related harm compared to other jurisdictions. And we shouldn't be surprised that Jersey has high levels of alcohol-related harm when our local data consistently shows we have some of the highest per capita consumption rates in Europe. We know that higher consumption rates at a population level are directly linked to higher rates of alcohol-related harm, including hospitalizations, alcohol-related domestic violence, and of course the plethora of preventable diseases, which we as a government have given our commitment to address in the government plan. The government has a breadth of policy responses to address the balance of harms from alcohol, including fiscal measures through AirPOs. As a community, we're fortunate to have a range of offers engaging our children and young people in understanding risk from alcohol. And this is well evidenced to delay onset and reduce levels of alcohol abuse. Our CIPES department has a good personal, social and health education curriculum, supporting understanding, prevention and delay. Previous investments in alcohol services ensure we are able to both intervene early and to support higher risk groups. Government officers are now working on the foundations of a new substance use strategy, which will provide the future Council of Ministers with proposals to develop and to build on these evidence-based approaches. So these AirPO measures are not to be seen in isolation. They are part of a broader response that together will have the best impact on improving health outcomes. But as ever, we are here again with an annual Assembly discussion on alcohol. So as the Health Minister, it stands to me to argue the importance of price and affordability as a part of balancing the benefits and harms of alcohol. And whilst I appreciate the concerns of local business and the impact of COVID-19 on hospitality, we must also balance business needs against the need to protect the health and well-being of islanders, which we know has also been greatly affected by the pandemic. Our most recent local data from the Jersey Opinions and Lifestyle Survey for 2020 shows that 29% of islanders now report drinking more often compared to before the COVID-19 pandemic. and that an increase in drinking is associated with stress and worry. We also see in our local data that almost a quarter of adults now report drinking more than the recommended weekly limit of alcohol, which is an increase from 2019 when the previous survey was taken. Whilst that also means 3/4 of the population are drinking within lower risk limits, we must bear in mind that there are still risks associated with low levels of alcohol, including the risk of certain cancers. There is a greater risk to health, both mental and physical, associated with moderate drinking, which has historically been purported as being beneficial to health, although it's increasingly reported now in scientific literature that this is not the case. We know that price is indisputably linked to consumption levels, and public health officers have set out the breadth of research demonstrating this previously. It is a lever that the World Health Organization recommends governments with high consumption levels, such as Jersey, employ to reduce alcohol-related harm. We know that targeted price measures are effective in addressing the most harmful consumption patterns and can impact affordability of those beverage types used in the most harmful way. Our minimum unit price of 50p per unit helps prevent some of the strongest alcoholic drinks being sold at the very lowest prices, and helps to balance prices in off-licensed premises such as supermarkets with the price of alcohol in on-licensed premises such as bars and restaurants. The most recent data regarding off versus on licensed drinking shows that almost 2/3 or 63% of money spent on alcohol was spent at off licensed premises. Officers will be assessing this balance again as soon as data becomes available to understand any impact of minimum unit pricing. But aside from minimum unit pricing, tax measures are still needed to address broader population level harm and harmful consumption in higher income groups. Our local data shows that in Jersey, it is those with higher incomes that are more likely to report drinking 14 units or more a week. These higher income drinkers won't be impacted by minimum unit pricing, and taxation is an effective way to capture the health harms and risks associated with harmful consumption among these groups, and to ensure that the price broadly reflects the harm and costs to our health and social services. In other words, as well as disincentivizing widespread harmful levels of consumption, this allows additional revenue to be collected to fund our health system and services dealing with addiction and alcohol-related harm. These measures are a key tool in our armory to address alcohol-related harm as part of a wider substance misuse strategy. So I support the government plan, which proposes to target increases on both spirits and wine. Since 1995, as has been mentioned, duty on wine and spirits has not increased in line with beer and cider, which has seen increases of almost twofold comparatively. And regarding spirits specifically, public health officers advise this is the type of alcohol consumed most by children and young people, almost a quarter of whom reported in the recent school survey that they would reduce their consumption of alcohol if price was to increase. Given the increased harm of alcohol to the developing adolescent brain and risks of developing dependence into adulthood, there are significant public health gains in ensuring duty reflects harm and reduces consumption amongst this vulnerable group. And regarding wine, as the Treasury Minister has already stated, our local data in Jersey shows that this is the type of alcohol most often consumed in a hazardous and harmful way by adults, and also by a much larger number of islanders than any other category of alcohol. So, to conclude, whilst the cultural and social importance of alcohol cannot be overlooked, we must ensure through a continuing evidence-based action that we protect our population health and well-being from the risks it poses. So I cannot support this amendment, but support taxation that is proportionate and prioritises our most vulnerable and the health and well-being of islanders. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Conetable St Helier.
Thank you, sir. It is all about balance, as a speaker said earlier in today's debate. And indeed, as the Health Minister has said, it would have been unbalanced for the scrutiny panel or indeed a private member to have proposed a zero increase in AMPO on alcohol. I think the problem with what we've heard from the Health Minister, and it is a familiar, a very well expressed, but it's a familiar argument that we hear every time we debate duties on alcohol, is that it has not been a balanced speech. It's simply been about the ability of our technical experts to link the price of alcohol to the consumption. There's been no reference in the Minister's speech to the needs of the hospitality industry and all that hospitality brings to Jersey. And I'm very pleased that the Hospitality Association has lobbied states members, and I do hope that members will listen carefully to the arguments of this beleaguered industry that has had to cope not only with Brexit and the huge pressures on staffing caused by Brexit, and indeed who've had to cope with increased regulation and all kinds of laws passed by this Assembly, which have made the cost of running a hospitality business much greater than it used to be. But of course, they've also had to cope with the pandemic and all of the stops and starts that have been necessary to secure our public health. Hospitality is, despite all of the pressures in Jersey, a truly remarkable a sector of our industry, and it gives me enormous pleasure in my role as Constable of St Helier to visit and in some cases to open brand new hospitality premises, including one just a couple of weeks ago in town. It's quite remarkable to me that our hospitality entrepreneurs are still willing, in spite of all the difficulties and obstacles and red tape, they're still willing to commit their money and their time to opening or reopening venues so that we, and most importantly, I think, visitors to the island of Jersey can enjoy a night out. Inevitably, I think some of the arguments have focused on people who abuse alcohol, but in my experience, the majority of people who want to go out in the evening or indeed at some other time of day for a drink or a meal, these consume in moderation, and I don't believe that it is fair to put up the prices of what they're doing. And I think in particular at this difficult time for hospitality, it would be wrong to send out a message that the States of Jersey simply is not listening to the hospitality industry. In the grand scheme of things, the amount of lost AMPO is very small. But I think the message we can send out today as an Assembly is that we listen to the hospitality industry and that we're prepared to support their willingness to back this amendment, which simply looks at a cost of living rise in alcohol across the board and doesn't target any particular part of that consumption. Beer drinkers possibly would be sorry because they could have had an AMPO-free budget. But I think the key point here is that the hospitality industry would like us to support the scrutiny amendment, and it's for that reason that I'll be supporting it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Conetable. Deputy Ash.
Thank you very much, sir. I would certainly, in normal times, wish to support something that is reducing an AMPO duty, but unfortunately, this isn't. Had it been a straightforward, we will not put AMPO duties up across the board, I'd vote for that, sir. But this isn't that, is it? It's a sort of amendment to make everybody look good and feel better, but it's really just rearranging the deck chairs. It's saying we'll now tax beer more and we'll lower the tax on spirits, which, as we've heard from the Health Minister, are perhaps have more of a negative impact on health. If people really want to help hospitality, sir, and I'll give you an example. I received an email the other day from a restaurant in town, and they said, "Dear Deputy Ash, did you or did you not change the law on alcohol and price promotions?" I said, because what we've been doing, we've had a £25 menu, 5 courses, and should you wish to take advantage of that, you can then take advantage of having our £20 drinks package, which for 2 hours includes house wine, house beer, and I don't think spirits were involved in this. And it's proved enormously popular. We've got full bookings for Christmas, and we have very good bookings at weekends because of this. But we've been visited by the police, who've told us very pleasantly, and he was insistent on that very pleasantly, that we should stop or they might not be so pleasant. So he has. So he wanted me to clarify the position, and I said, but the states did vote through that we would ask the licensing bench, but it's not our decision. It's the licensing bench as to whether we can have price promotions and whether the hospitality industry can promote itself in that way. So we can't do that. We also have a problem with the competition regulatory, where we have considerable amounts of problems with what many perceive to be a restricted practices. But again, and I told him the Assembly voted against that. So they voted for restrictive practices and to have no investigation into that. Fortunately, recently we have seen that the Jersey Competition Regulator is now going to look into pricing and how prices are progressed. And I'm very pleased to hear that, sir. And we should have that verdict in January and February. And it's very salient to this debate, because we can leave these, we can fix the tax wherever we want. We could have tax, we could knock 1% off the tax. Do you think that would help the average person in Jersey who goes into a licensed premises? No, it would not, sir. When we left beer alone, probably for the best part of 18 months, beer in some pubs went up by £1, went up nearly 15–20%. So what we need is another look into, and this is different from what the Treasury makes it, but it's very salient for what the average man and woman on the island pay. And so whatever we decide today will make no difference to the average man or woman on the island, whatever we decide on Senator Moore's proposition. I was also so very disappointed to hear Deputy Pallett's comment on the licensing law. He had a chance, sir, and I don't like to put it too strongly, but he failed when he had that chance, and failed abjectly, sir. And I believe, I wasn't in the Assembly at the time, but it never really even appeared before the Assembly. In fairness to Deputy Morell, sir, who now has the task of looking and changing this, he seems to have got a grip with it, and unlike others in this Assembly, sir, who get impatient and complain that it's X amount of time since my proposition was passed, I do realise that COVID has brought changes, and I realise it's made it difficult for Deputy Morell and that team, and that COVID also has brought different challenges, and so I have been patient. They have kept me up to date throughout, and they are going to have a new law that we will fortunately be able to debate, and we can look then how we help the hospitality industry. Do we say that we can't have promotions in pubs, but restaurants can promote? Do we limit certain times in pubs? There are a whole host of things that we can then decide, but we can't decide as an Assembly at the moment, sir, because that, as you would well be aware, rests with the licensing authority. As I say, the great thing of this, whether it's passed or not passed, is that we are now going to have a new law. We're going to have the Jersey Competition Regulator, and I really have a lot of faith in them now. I think they're going to do a tremendous piece of work that will also show us concerning things such as shipping costs, which we always hear, oh, it's shipping costs. And that's not with alcohol generally, it's with everything in Jersey, or shipping costs. Well, we'll see, sir, because they're going to look into that. So in closing, sir, I would urge people to reject this. It's a nothing piece of work. It's just rearranging the deck chairs. And I would also say, as a lager lout with a beer belly, I'm glad that no one would wish to be as sexist as that in the other direction, sir. Thank you very much.
Right, does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Hegarah.
Thank you, sir. It is interesting, the comments that have been made, and I'm fully supportive of what the Health Minister says. And I, for many years, worked alongside health in relation to alcohol-related matters. But for me, it is about equality and making sure that we increase across the board. And the reason I say that also, sir, is the fact that probably the consumption of wine in particular will be when people go out for a meal, as well as other places. But that is a significant sort of area where people may consume more wine than they would beer, sir. And everyone knows that the consumption of food whilst drinking alcohol is significantly better for you than just drinking alcohol alone. So I would say, sir, that if somebody's having a meal and a glass of wine, it's better than maybe sitting in a bar and just consuming a pint of beer or cider. There's also arguments that will say that wine, of course, as well as spirits, are of a higher percentage than beer and cider. But of course, that is not in all cases. And of course, now there are many wine producers who are trying to lower the percentages of their alcohol. So from my perspective, sir, I will be supporting this amendment because I do think it's about a fair playing field. There are a number of new restaurants that have turned up within the confines of St Helier, around some of the smaller streets. And so I would like to be able to support them and the hospitality industry in this particular time. So from my perspective, I will support this. As I said, I'm fully aligned with the fact of health and fully supportive of that. And I think the more we can do to help Irelanders in relation to these matters, and particularly those who are dependent on alcohol and other substances, then I would be supportive of that, sir, as well. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy Senator Valois.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'm just going to respond to Deputy Ash as the panel received correspondence from the Jersey Hospitality Association, and they referred particularly to the drinks promotions, and they stated, quoting, "When the States Assembly voted to allow drinks promotions on licensed premises, the industry was not consulted. There have, though, been numerous occasions when commentators have clearly articulated how damaging drinks promotions would be for the industry. The JHA is welcoming the review currently being conducted by the JCRA and remains hopeful that the licensing authorities maintain the current policy not to allow them. All that drinks promotions will achieve is an increase in government revenue, as it will receive the same AMPO duty from each drink sold, while the business selling it will receive less in return. It also flies against the message of responsible drinking that the industry supports and the government promotes. During the debate, the measure was being put forward as a welcome boost for sales that would support the industry." And that's just a brief quote from the submission received by the panel. And I think it's very important for us to listen to that and understand what they're saying. And from the emphasising the speech made by Deputy Ayer is, of course, the mainstay of our fiscal strategy that we have is about low, broad, simple and fair. And that's exactly what the panel are trying to emphasise here. And I think one of the arguments that haven't been pointed out is, of course, the possibility of beer and cider being the gateway to the more stronger spirits and wines. And I think that's very important to identify as an issue. especially for our younger people. And I suppose I could be really radical and say, well, if we were extremely serious about the health of our young people and our islanders, we could be suggesting for alcohol like New Zealand are suggesting for tobacco. You know, at a point in time, if you were born in a certain year, you cannot buy alcohol after that. And that's radical. That's you know, coming from a completely different point of view. What the panel are asking here is really to state that we should have an increase in AMPO to recognise the health issue, but also recognising the impact that the industry has experienced and continue to experience. And we've seen the response from JHA about the fact that there are cancellations happening due to the concerns around COVID as it is at present. So I would plead with members, although understanding the health arguments, we're not suggesting as a panel to remove any increase. What we're actually saying is low, broad, fair and simple, which is the fiscal strategy that this States Assembly supported. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Senator Chief Minister.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'm glad to follow the last speaker. Come as no surprise, sir, to members, that I am asking or urging members to not support this amendment. At the end of the day, sir, firstly, what we are being asked to do, sir, is spend £231,000. That's the impact. It reduces revenue. It's therefore an increase in deficit or an increase in borrowing, but effectively it means therefore it's an increase in expenditure, and therefore one's got to decide where one wants to apply £231,000 for the best impact. And either that could be in supporting hospitality, or it could be in maintaining and increasing in disincentives for certain groups of drinkers to, as a disincentivize drinking the high alcoholic content, such as spirits particularly. And that's the choice. We all around the Assembly, or I think most people usually say we all support hospitality, and I would hope we all support children, particularly those of us who are parents. And just to remind members from the comment in the Council Minister's comments, the Jersey Alcohol Strategy also says that alcohol pricing is an important tool for discouraging the consumption of alcohol. The report notes that alcohol pricing is more effective in discouraging consumption in some key target groups, in particular young people and problem drinkers. And certainly, sir, from what I see and from what I'm informed, is certainly at the younger age group that one sees considerable consumption or preference in consumption on spirits, particularly, and very much less so on beer and cider. And as with all these things, it is a balance, and that is why we went for the position of not increasing AMPO on beer and cider, but actually, sir, particularly targeting the higher, the more intensive areas, shall we say, of spirits and wine. And as a wine drinker, just to correct at least one assertion from Deputy Morell, yes, I'm obviously in touch with my feminine side if I follow his logic. But anyway, sir, to correct something else, sir, in terms of the FPP, the FPP note in their report that there are only small revenue-raising measures in 2022, limited to duty increases, which is in line with the panel's advice to avoid implementing significant new revenue streams too quickly. I hope that clarifies that matter as well. Now, in terms of, obviously, as an accountant, members will no doubt expect me to say this. If the Assembly does decide to vote for the amendment, we will have to find £231,000 from somewhere. I have informed the Minister of Economic Development it will come from his budget on the basis that it will be deemed a preference to supporting hospitality, and therefore it seems fair that that comes out of the Economic Development budget. I have left him to digest that consideration, as he was only formed just before lunch. I think I do need to make the point, sir, we absolutely do support the hospitality industry. We have spent and supported hospitality over the last, I'll say 15, 18 months, depending when you take the point of the support starting. we have spent millions of pounds on hospitality since the pandemic. We obviously introduced, in the wider economic sense, the Spend Local card. That by itself was £10 million, and that a considerable amount was spent within the hospitality industry. So let's have no attempt here, sir, to infer that by not supporting this, one's not supporting hospitality, and that by supporting this, this is going to make a huge difference to the hospitality industry. It is an argument that comes through every year, and of course, in every year, everybody would prefer not to pay tax or increase levels. And I think Deputy Ash has commented already on how much or how little the consumer actually sees in terms of even if one freezes duties, or even if anyone only puts prices up by less than cost of living, what the impact is on actually the consumer and that retail price. So so I've covered the FPP, covered the spending implications, and I've covered the general principles. But for me, sir, fundamentally, when we had the discussion, it was around actually the impact, or at least disincentivizing the alcohol consumption within the younger age group. And that is what the trend appears to be. That's what we're informed of, greater consumption of particularly spirits in that category. And so for me, sir, we, despite various assertions, we do often and very often consider children in our considerations. And for me, that is the deciding factor. That for me, I would rather maintain the disincentivization, particularly on spirits, aimed particularly at that younger age group of drinkers, rather than, in this instance, if you like, targeting it across what is said to be targeting across to assisting the hospitality industry, but actually that has not been quantified. We do support the hospitality industry. We do it in a huge variety of ways, and we will continue to do so. I would suggest this is not the best way of spending £231,000 in an untargeted way, which will have undefined results, essentially. If that is the view of the Assembly, that's absolutely fine, but hopefully we've made our position clear, sir. Thank you.
Very much, Chief Minister. Connor-Tarbison Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I've spoken in previous debates in a similar vein, and that is to say, my feeling is that we are taxing alcohol in the wrong way. I contend, sir, that the government should be looking in more detail at alcoholic content. The difference of effect of a 14.5% wine as opposed to an 11% one is significant, and likewise, perhaps a 6% beer as opposed to a 4% one. And thus I feel more aligned with the Council of Ministers' way of thinking on this particular matter, sir. It wouldn't be difficult in this technical age with sophisticated point of sale systems to be able to achieve this, selective alcohol content selling process. And this in turn would give the public a broader option as to how much they might wish to spend on a drink. This must be a fairer approach, and this suggestion that wine is for ladies and beer is for gentlemen, I think is a bit nonsensical in this day and age. I have difficulty in sympathising with the hospitality industry, I have to say, in the light of the significant margins being included in their drinks prices, and suggest that whilst for the more well-off, any increases will be unnoticed, for others who may be less well-off and enjoy the occasional social drink with friends, it will hurt the most. And I have to say that is said, sir, with the experience over the past few weeks of looking at drinks prices as part of my licensing obligations within the parish, and they do vary significantly. Whilst I empathise with the arguments put forward by the panel, I would rather they had focused on alcoholic content rather than price, so feel unable to support the amendment as put forward at this point. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Connor. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Deputy Wickenden.
Thank you, sir. I come at this from an area where I have tried to freeze duty back in 2018 and significantly lost within this assembly and made my arguments about consumption and price. I've got to say, I'm going to stand up with the Chief Minister and say we have supported the hospitality industry over the last couple of years in so many significant ways to try and keep jobs, to keep the industry going, to make sure that restaurants and bars and hospitality is open as much as it is absolutely possible, sir. And it would be really unfair for anyone to say that we haven't in the ways that we've been working. There was the £100 card and 200 for some people that we put out to be spent within the local economy, and a lot of that I remember seeing a young child desperate to pay for the coffees for her mum and dad when she was sat in one of our local coffee shops because she had a £100 card and that's how she wanted to spend it. But there's the low, broad, simple and fair argument, which just seems to be kind of misconstrued into this argument. We don't and have probably never put up duties in an even manner through many years in the past. We've significantly put up duty on lights of spirits and wines over that we have on beers over successive years. So it's not as if they're all at the same level now and we're now coming to change the levels between the different types of alcohol. That's not what we're doing here, and that's what we've never done. So it can't be low, broad, simple and fair when there are such varying differences in percentages on duty across the different bands that we have set out here. There's also, I've got to say, from being out in hospitality since COVID, I've seen the hospitality industry work in different ways on how they're already pricing. I've been to one establishment in St Helier where a large glass of Sauvignon Blanc is £14.75 a glass now, where before COVID it was about £6.25. So that hospitality industry itself has already decided to significantly put up the price of the alcohol within their establishment. Then you go to another one and the glass is £7.40, and then you go to another one and it's £4.25, sir. The hospitality industry have always had the ability, no matter what the duty is, to set their alcohol prices at a level they feel they want to for their profit margins. I can go back to, in my amendment to the 2018 budget, on Amendment 6, I did a whole load of work looking at the duty increases over 10 years and the price and volumes and likes. And say in 2007, when duty went up on spirits by 3.5%, the prices went up by 10%. In 2018, duty went on 4%. The prices went up 19%. And it goes on. So the duty here, what we've been trying to do is, in this government plan, and I would have liked them to be zero again, so I still think that we keep putting them up for the wrong reasons and it causes more harm than good. But when we're looking, certainly there is a level of revenue raising. There's a lot more spending that we've been trying to put in key areas. There's COVID that we've been dealing with and the expenditure that goes on there, sir. Trying to target biggest increases on the most harmful areas and change people's behaviours. So maybe not have the glass of wine, have a nice glass of cider. There's plenty of good opportunities for different ciders out there, sir, that are tasty. But this government plan is trying to target to change behaviours in the way that they do with pricing. To say that this is going to have a massive effect in the hospitality, they're already doing that to themselves in some aspects, sir. That's not what this is about. But the Chief Minister raised very carefully, this is about over £200,000 of lost revenue in the change in this amendment. And where we've got plenty of amendments asking to spend money with no idea where the money's coming from, the idea that we're going to remove revenue at the same time as asked to spend more seems a little bit in the realms of insanity, sir. So I do see what the amendment's trying to achieve, but it's not targeted. It's more, as Deputy Ash said, I won't get his name wrong there. Deputy Ash said, it's just moving the deck chairs around. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. This is a very interesting debate, and I think to some extent I agree. The change is very small. Don't see a problem with having the across the board increases in prices. There's a few points to be made, but there's a wider issue here, a much wider issue for our society. And what we don't actually have is a decent building a safer society strategy, because it's been lost. It was diminished and it was lost in the plan to produce to replace it with a more structured system. And then there was a change of personnel, and it seems to have been lost in the entire change to government structure. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed first, because we can raise prices on one type of alcohol above another in whatever way we want to. But until we look in our society at the key drivers as to what causes people to drink unhealthily, what causes people to use alcohol as that sort of substitute for other things that should be in their lives, then we're really tinkering around the edges. And that's the wider societal problem that we have. And now I'm pleased to hear members of the government talking about raising revenue, because they'll be supporting the removal of the social security cap, which raises significant revenue. So that's nice to hear at this stage. That's a really nice part of the day. I would say, sir, that I'll be supporting this amendment simply because it is across the board. It doesn't isolate any part of our population. And as I've said, I don't think it's that huge an impact. In terms of the amount of money that is being lost, well, it's not been raised yet. I'll raise one simple thing, and I don't know, I'm not an accountant. That wasn't a life choice for me. There is a World Cup at the end of next year. And that may, if it's stereotyping day, let's go along with this. And therefore there may be a lot more beer consumed. So this could actually be an absolute genius move in terms of taxation for this assembly. We could be really benefiting from the World Cup, particularly if home nations do really well. So there's always that in the background, because a glass of beer or cider watching the football match is very unhealthy. Obviously, sir, my body's a temple and I wouldn't touch a drop. And so therefore, I don't know if I could comment on this. And I'll forgive you that, Chief Minister. At last, we get a bit of humour out of the day. That's lovely to see. But so I will be supporting this amendment because it is across the board. And I don't think the significant change is there. We need more. The evidence we need is on our approach to alcohol and its use and the antisocial level of drinking. In terms of young people, yeah, absolutely, we need to support young people. But why is that happening? Well, one of the reasons is in the centre of St Helier. I'm sorry, I have to say it. There are not the facilities that are needed by the young people in the centre of St Helier because they've just not been there. And that the projects that are meant to have been happening aren't being built, and they could be. And it's those things that impact long term and get young people away from that habitual use of alcohol as some sort of pastime. And I'm not one for demonising young people. So therefore, we should be very careful in the way that we're judging that. And I don't think there is a reason to target one area of alcohol without a much wider strategy. If the next government comes back with a really good strategy in terms of the way we're dealing with alcohol and the way we're dealing with drug use, in the way we're, rather than criminalising people, we treat people and we help them change their behaviour for the good, then perhaps we can look at this use of taxation as the main driver in terms of habitual change, because it simply does not work. So I'll be supporting this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I think we need a bit of levity in this debate, sir. Partly because Deputy Ash is not on his usual good form, because he's having to vote against his own manifesto pledges, which means that he's probably slightly less enthusiastic in his speech making because he doesn't really believe in it. And it's interesting to see, in fact, a number of members of the Council of Ministers who have previously opposed any increases in duty and even proposed amendments to them, who are now slavishly following the government party line on this. And that's a shame, because I don't think they were elected to follow a party whip for an invisible party that doesn't exist yet. There is a risk, of course, when Deputy Ward makes comments like "my body is a temple," that somebody will come back with a comment, and I suppose that you're Buddha. And I wouldn't say that, of course, because I know that Deputy Ward keeps himself in top shape. And my favourite response, of course, is always to say, why have a six-pack when you can have a keg? And I'm sure there are many other alcohol-related jokes that one could make, sir. So let me read from a manifesto, or at least some pledges that somebody made somewhere along the line only a couple of years ago, saying, well, you could argue that the introduction of a sugar tax, which in a way I don't agree with, because you should be able to do what you like, but you could increase taxes on some things. And this person went on to say the health argument is always used. But if that's the case, that there's an increase in A&E dealing with sports injuries, then you could say tax sports clubs, but you wouldn't do that. Deputy Ash, speaking to the JEP in 2019, who said that he was bringing amendments to quash the then government's increases, which were above inflation on alcohol duty. So it just goes to show how quickly one can rip up one's manifesto pledges when it comes to pressure from your particular government and no doubt party. But of course, we know they're not a party yet until the election, even though they are opining on all sorts of things on social media. And they've said that the government plan is their manifesto. I'll let the listeners decide which one of those statements they think is or are true. My concern here is that we hear these health arguments time and time again. We've heard a remarkable argument saying that this is to try and protect children. Now, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but when it comes to young people these days, alcohol isn't the neatest thing anymore, if you'll excuse the slightly subtle pun. Because there's been a downturn in alcohol amongst youngsters. That doesn't mean we should be complacent, of course, for those who do tend to use it, but they don't see it as very trendy. It's not fashionable to drink. There are other things that they often do to get their highs, and it often involves clean living and healthy lifestyle and sport. And that's what you'll find if you talk to many teachers and educationalists, which I think is a really positive thing to remind ourselves of when we hear so many often disproportionate negative comments sometimes about young people in the island and generally. So I think young people are actually leading us by example. And are they giving up alcohol in droves because it's too expensive? No, because they probably can't legally buy it anyway. And I would ask this government, like many governments going before us, is to, if you're genuinely concerned about alcohol amongst young people and setting the trends for the next generation, then why do you allow alcohol to be sold in places where young people frequent, which are very public? I mean, you can go to any of the big supermarkets, and next to the cakes and the chocolates or the washing powder or whatever, the newspapers, you'll find alcohol being sold at probably the cheapest price that you can find it anywhere in the island, whether you go to Waitrose, Co-op, etc. And it's there, it's being advertised, it's on display. I've even said it before, it's been a few years since I went to the bowling alley, but you'd have adverts for Foster's, and I'm sure other brands were also available when you're throwing your ball down the alley, looking at, oh, maybe in a few years' time when I'm old enough, I can buy some Foster's. So, and why do we allow supermarkets to sell alcohol in the first place if the government wants to restrict alcohol sales? Surely it should be a specialist place that you need to buy them. This is if, of course, you want to clamp down on alcohol. And of course, there's another addiction in the room that we haven't really talked about, and that is the addiction of successive governments to duty on and AMPO on alcohol. Same argument, I'm sure, could be made for tobacco, but the difference, of course, between tobacco and alcohol is that it is possible to consume alcohol moderately. We know that the health advice is changing, but alcohol consumed moderately by some people who might just have a drink every now and again on special occasions. And we had some really forensic detail about the pricing of alcohol in different establishments from Deputy Wickenden, which I thought was helpful for those of us who are maybe not quite as familiar. and we know exactly how much alcohol can cost in different drinks in different bars. But people who don't drink a lot and who don't have a lot of money, this is going to be another issue for them when they go out. Now, I did read the very good letter from Mrs. Bosk, or Miss Bosk, who sent it round on behalf of the Hospitality Association. And I always read these kind of letters with an open mind. And I do think that the industry has been through a particularly tough time. And when we simply apply any increases at or above the rate of inflation, RPI, we sometimes forget, well, actually, RPI isn't a thing that applies equally to everybody or to every industry. RPI is often something that is done to us, even though we're told that it's the economy which dictates that. But in fact, if you ask a lot of the industries, have they seen an uptake in their business by RPI, you'll probably find no, they haven't. It's been a really tough year. Yes, government has stepped in, there has been furlough, but many businesses nonetheless have struggled. They've put in extra marketing and extra work that they might not have, and there's been a lot of give and take, and I think a lot of goodwill from customers and their own staff who have been working on the front line of COVID, often very exposed. And it simply doesn't make sense here to say that we're going to put a price rise on one type of alcohol, but not on another. And if we come back to the sugar arguments, because I was I took on board what my Constable of St. Brillard said, in the sense that, you know, he would like to see it more targeted. But do we then start selecting on the basis of sugar? You know, is the next step to say, well, actually, I don't like spirit, so I'm going to tax that. But I prefer lager because I think that's a good working class drink, and therefore will support a freeze on lager and cider. But what about cider having a high sugar content? What if somebody actually wants to try and avoid their sugar intake and opt for a drink like vodka or gin? I've got a very good male friend that I went to school with. He doesn't drink a lot, but he'll allow himself a drink every now and again. And his choice of drink is gin and tonic. And he does that because he likes the taste, but it's also, he thinks, one of the less calorific drinks. He tries to look after himself. He goes to the gym quite a lot. And so if I go out and maybe I'm having a wine or a half a lager with him, or more often a cappuccino, he might be going for the gin and tonic. And should we be saying to somebody like that who's trying to make the right health choices, well, no, actually, you should be paying more for that. And this is where the health argument becomes very, I think, difficult, because is it for the health minister to start dictating exactly and micromanaging which types of alcohol should be being put up? I mean, are we going to reduce tax on non-alcoholic beverages? Luckily, we've seen the choice in the industry of not only non-alcoholic beers now, but non-alcoholic gins right across the piece has flourished, because there is a demand for people wanting those kind of drinks that don't have any alcohol content, but they're still taxed with GST. And I do have a challenge to the industry, to be fair, just to try and remain even-handed. I think it's really important that non-drinkers or people who want to try and cut down are not penalised when they go out, because you can see if you're charged, say, £4 for a pint of lager, but you're paying virtually the same for a pint of lemonade or Coca-Cola, which isn't necessarily even real. It could be syrup with just fizzy water. You can understand why people think they want to get value for money. And I would like to see the kind of initiatives we used to have at Christmas, I don't know if they still exist, where drinks would be free, for soft drinks would be free for the designated driver, or at least cost price or cheap for those who don't want to drink alcohol. So it's not an easy area to discuss. We're not going to solve all the issues today, but we're certainly not going to help the problem by relying on above inflation prices for issues which have fundamental reasons and motivations for people's health and people's choices, sir. I think this is a way that we can not just help the industry, because it will give them a reason to keep prices down, but it's also a way to acknowledge that our island has been through a very difficult time, and it stops the divisive nature of what is being proposed by the government. I do ask the members of the government who would normally be inclined to support this, who didn't bring an amendment to try and what they say is make it fairer across the board, is that they should be supporting this, because this is a fair flat rates which is going to be applied to all types of alcohol below inflation, and I think it's something that we can accommodate at the moment, sir, and I commend the panel for bringing the amendment.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy IA to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I thank all members for their contribution to the debate. Deputy Pinnell is concerned about young people's consumption of spirits specifically, which is of concern to the panel, but this should be addressed by education, not by duty risers. The Deputy of St Twans said that it was not to be seen in isolation, but these risers do isolate wine and spirits. He mentions the risks to health and welfare of islanders, which is what this amendment speaks to across the alcohol types. The Chief Minister is apprehensive about the cost of the amendment, but did not mention the unbiasedness of the amendment. And Deputy Wickenden said that not all duty risers are historically the same, or perhaps it is time that they were. And the Constable of St Bullards believes that we are taxing alcohol in the wrong way. This is certainly a question for another day. The Constable of St John's quoted the Jersey Hospitality Association letter and is concerned about a recovery in the tourism industry, which we all are. And Deputy Pamplin is worried about addiction, which again we're all concerned about. Deputy Morell could not understand why beer and cider were excluded from impo duty risers. This amendment, of course, rectifies that anomaly. And Senator Moore is troubled by the inequity of the impo duties increases, as is Senator Pallett, who asks where's the evidence and wonders why the alcohol and licensing strategy has not been updated, which is an issue that does need to be reviewed. The Constable of St Helier mentioned that it is all about balance and is anxious about the effects on hospitality. And Deputy Lahegara stated that it is about equality and a fair playing field, which the panel is in accord with. And Senator Valois mentioned the radical regulations being introduced in other jurisdictions. And Deputy Ward was concerned by the causes of why people drink excessively and antisocial drinking, which is obviously of concern, but difficult to determine. Following a freeze of alcohol duty in last year's government plan, which was aimed at supporting the recovery of our hospitality sector, the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel was surprised to see the proposal to impose a 5% rise on wine and spirits in the coming year. The government plan outlines that consideration of the impact of this increase has been given, with the need to provide continuing support to the hospitality sector due to COVID-19 specifically mentioned. However, during the course of the panel's review, it has received submission from the Jersey Hospitality Association to express concern over the increase. They have specifically stated the industry has endured several years of damaging duty rises, and due to the pandemic, businesses have faced what is effectively 5 winter seasons in a row. They go on to say that they firmly believe any increase in duty will further increase the costs of doing business at a time when the pandemic is still having an effect. The JHA is also concerned that pushing up the price of duty-paid spirits will encourage more people to purchase the cheaper duty-free alternatives, especially as the restrictions on travel are eased. As indicated by the association, the Fiscal Policy Panel have highlighted in their 2021 annual report, the economy is recovering, but is still weakened and the outlook remains unclear. Whilst inflation is forecast to be higher over the next year, revenue-raising steps, including higher taxes, impose a burden and would not be appropriate at present. The Jersey Hospitality Association, in their letter to members, asks us all to support this amendment to the government plan, saying it seemed to them like a sensible compromise. They also mentioned that the last 20 months have had a devastating effect on the hospitality industry. With the exception of last year, the industry has endured damaging duty rises for a number of years, including just before the pandemic hit our shores. When costs are put up, it creates a much more difficult environment for businesses to flourish. The panel believes that any increase in duties should be in line with the mantra of keeping taxes low, broad, simple and fair, and believes the current proposition does not achieve this. We believe the small drop in revenue should be met by a reduction in allocation to the General Reserve. In summary, the panel are proposing a rational, level-headed approach and concludes that this amendment is a balanced approach between public health, revenue raising and the needs of the island's economy. Sir, I maintain the amendment and call for the appel.
As called for, I ask the greffier to place a voting link into the chat. Open the voting and ask members to vote in the usual way. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted. 27 votes pour, 13 votes contre, no abstention in the link. Further 2 votes pour and 3 votes contre in the chat.
We have the 27, please, sir.
Yes.
Those members who voted pour, the Constable of Grouville, Senator Farnham, Deputy Lehegra, Deputy Ward, Deputy of St Martin, Constable of St John, Deputy Labbe, Deputy Tadier, Constable of St Helier, Constable of St Clement, Constable of St Martin, Deputy of Grouville, Senator Pallett, Senator Mezek, Senator Valvar, the Constable of Trinity, Deputy Pamplin, Deputy Truscott, Deputy Ayer, Deputy Gardner, Senator Moore, Deputy Southern, Constable of St Lawrence, Deputy Morale, Constable of St Mary, Deputy Doublé, Deputy Alves, and as well as that, Constable of St Saviour and Deputy Higgins.
The next amendment listed in the running order is the 25th amendment lodged by Senator Gorst, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
1 page 2, paragraph B, after the words of up to those revised approvals, insert the words except that in summary table 3, the figure for refinancing of past service liabilities will be amended in each column to £135 million, is that the borrowing in this government plan only covers the liability in respect to the Jersey Teachers Superannuation Fund. 2, page 2, paragraph G, for the words up to £480 million, substitute up to £135 million. For the words past service pension liabilities, substitute Jersey Teachers Superannuation Fund past service pension liability. 3, page 3, paragraph L, designate the existing paragraph as paragraph M and insert the following paragraph as paragraph L. L, to agree that borrowing relating to COVID-19 and fiscal stimulus fund requirements should be of a short-term nature only for no more than 5 years and, for example, funded from the revolving credit facility, and accordingly that 1, council ministers be requested to bring forward proposals and future government plans to reduce this borrowing to zero by 31st December 2026, and 2, that the Minister for Treasury and Resources be requested to prioritise the application of any unspent funds at the end of 2021 and 2022, be these in respect of spending related to COVID-19, departmental revenue expenditure or capital expenditure, to be returned to the consolidated fund, and that these funds, along with receipts relating to the move of all taxpayers to current year basis, be used to minimise the borrowing requirements for COVID-19 and the fiscal stimulus fund and support the repayment of debt.
Senator Gorst.
Thank you, sir. I'm very mindful that pensions can be a niche subject and not very interesting. But for my part, this is an important amendment. And I want to start by saying thank you to my ministerial colleagues for their support of part 3 of my amendment, which is around COVID debt and ensuring that we pay that back as quickly as we can and that we don't extend it unnecessarily. And we can do that initially through an extended or the revolving credit facility in the coming year, and also replicating the amendment which was in the previous government plan. So this amendment is reasonable, sensible and prudent, and it is most certainly in our long-term interest to give this proposal further consideration. And my arguments are threefold, I suppose, sir, but most importantly, I believe it is the wrong time to make this decision to refinance the Pecker's debt by taking on external borrowing. It's the wrong time, sir, because as the Chief Minister said in his statement at the start of this sitting, and as the Treasury Minister said in her opening comments, we are still in the throes of a global pandemic, and the economy is still suffering from the effects of that global pandemic. And therefore it absolutely must be the wrong time to make a decision to take our borrowing from that figure that it was in 2018, 250 million that we all know about, to invest in appropriate social housing, to rent and to buy, to, during the course of this plan, 1.7 billion. In any view of the history of our economy and the history of the strength of Jersey's economic position, in the midst of a global pandemic must be the wrong time. And the only argument that I can see in favour of this being the right time is because money is cheap. So money, it sounds strange to say this, money can be expensive, money can be cheap. But at the end of the day, the money that we spend, we have to pay back. The money that the government has, of course, sir, belongs to all islanders. They've contributed to it, and they expect for it to be managed carefully, prudently, and in their best interests. So I contend, sir, that it's the wrong time. I also contend, sir, that we don't actually, in the proposal before us, in the government plan, have sufficient detail. And I was surprised, sir, to read the independent scrutiny advisor's view that they also thought that there wasn't sufficient detail in the government plan. Pleasantly surprised, I've found over the years, so I've not always been pleasantly surprised by scrutiny reviews or their independent advisors, but in this case I absolutely was. And that advisor, rightly to my mind, says that there isn't enough detail about how this debt would move over the 40 years if we didn't borrow in the market. I don't think that the department have been asked to do work on other options to reduce this debt. We know that a previous Treasury Minister reduced the length of time that the debt would be paid over by increasing the contribution. We don't have before us comparable figures to do that. And therefore, I believe that that work should be rightly undertaken during the course of 2022, so that an incoming government can understand the economic conditions better and can make the comparisons about what the right approach is to reprofile this debt over the coming years. So it's well known that for the last 3 years I've argued with my ministerial colleagues about the level of borrowing. I've been clear with them, they've been clear with me. I talked about this during the hospital borrowing debate. For me, to move in one parliamentary cycle from those low levels of borrowing to extremely high levels of borrowing is a risk. And it's a risk that's not been quantified. And I think it's a risk that we don't actually need to take. I know that those in favour of maintaining this proposal will say, as ministers have said in their comments to my amendment, the refinancing of pension liabilities is long overdue. There have been changes, and I'm not saying that it's wrong that there should be changes, because we know that one of the reasons that the PECR's debt is growing in the way that rightly needs to be addressed is because we in the states and in government are employing more people. That is one of the driving factors of the increasing cost of this liability. I think the Chief Minister reminded us that this liability is already on the government's balance sheet. And of course it is. But what we are doing is taking it from the way that it's categorised now, making a number of financial assumptions, calculating the cost or savings of those assumptions, and saying that using those assumptions, using the low cost of money today, and I use the word today advisedly, means that we'll make over the life of the 40-year debt a saving of £150 million. And I'm not going to criticise those assumptions, but I would just remind members that there is no proposal to make any savings during 2022. The proposal is that any borrowing would be in place for the start of 2023 so that you could start to see savings in 2023. But equally, sir, there are no savings attributed to this action in the government plan during the life of this plan. They are assumed to take place. They are assumed to take place. I've got no reason to question or to doubt that they wouldn't take place. But what that would require is during the course of 2022, it would require officials in Treasury to go to the market, the debt markets that is, and to seek to borrow money on at least 2, if not 3 occasions, depending on whether they ultimately decide to go to the market once or twice for the hospital borrowing. So we know, sir, that the hospital borrowing, all things being equal, can be launched on the market around Easter or just before Easter. It would then, I believe, require an incoming government to go again to the market to refinance this pension liability, and they'd start that process towards the end, middle, third quarter of the coming year in order to have it in place for the beginning or early in 2023. That would be going to the markets for over £1 billion of debt in one financial year. I'm not sure that's a sensible or prudent financial policy. It is certainly something that we have never done before, nor is it something that I think any of our predecessors would have considered doing. So it has been absolutely right, and the Treasury Minister reminded us in her opening speech, it's been absolutely right that we didn't use the strategic reserve to pay for the costs of COVID and economic support during the COVID pandemic. And let's be clear, we don't, as we sit here, know whether we will have to provide further economic support to keep islanders in jobs during the course of 2022, sorry, saying it confused with the years, 2022. We don't know that. We hope not, but we don't know it. So during the course of this year, the government produced a borrowing strategy. In that borrowing strategy, it basically laid the ground for higher borrowing with the potential that that would affect our credit rating, by saying that we could live as an island with a lower credit rating than we've currently got. None of us know what the effect ultimately of COVID might be on the economy and therefore on the strength of our credit rating. Of course we don't. None of us were quite sure what the effect of Brexit might have been on the strength of our credit rating. These are unknowns. And because they are unknown, I believe that there is a risk that is unknown in maintaining this particular decision in the government plan. Now, sir, I've looked at the need to deal with the teachers' pension in a totally different way, because members will know from looking at the numbers that that payment in effect balloons during the course of the length of financing. And therefore it's eminently sensible for a much smaller amount of borrowing to manage that risk and deal with it appropriately in this way. But it is not sensible, in my view. It is not reasonable. It is not prudent at this moment in time, on the 14th of December 2021, to commit to this level of borrowing in the midst of a pandemic with insufficient detail. So I started by saying, I know pensions are terribly boring. Of course they are. But they are terribly, terribly important for future islanders. As individuals, if we have a pension, as a government, as we have a pension for staff. And so, sir, it is right that we haven't used the strategic reserve, but let us be open about what we have done. We are relying on the strategic reserve to continue to return good returns and to continue to grow as the only strategy to pay back the borrowing. The only strategy to pay back the borrowing on the hospital. The only strategy. So whilst we haven't spent it, and that is right, we have in effect used it as collateral to pay off the borrowing, because we now cannot use it for anything else. I support that policy. It was and is the right thing to do to pay for the hospital. But we should not add on top of that momentous decision the risk that the government is asking us to add today. And I remind members, sir, that our own independent economic advisors tell us that whilst they are broadly supportive of this plan, the next government, if this plan is maintained as it is, the next government will have to raise taxes. Surely it is right to pause, it is right to review and ask ourselves, is this the right decision today? Or should we give ourselves a few more months to properly quantify the risks, properly understand the economic conditions, and properly understand the other options? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. Is the amendment seconded? Does any member wish to speak? Deputy Pinner.
Thank you, sir. Senator Gorst was very clear in his eloquent speech during the debate on our hospital that he was concerned about the total level of borrowing, as he has just reiterated in his current initial speech, proposed in this government plan. To address that concern, he is asking members to consider this amendment. I thought it best to deconstruct the Senator's amendments into the two key themes. The borrowing related to COVID-19 and the Fiscal Stimulus Fund, and the refinancing of the Public Employees Contributory Retirement Scheme, the PECRS or PECRS liability. As Senator Gorst highlights in his amendment, the borrowing required to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic was largely unavoidable. However, I would add that due to the robust performance of Jersey's economy, the financial impact has been significantly better than originally forecast. In last year's government plan debate, this Assembly supported the Senator's amendment to prioritise the application of unspent funds to minimise the borrowing requirement. This has also contributed to a reduction in the overall level of borrowing relating to COVID-19. So it may seem strange to members that a member of the Council of Ministers is proposing an amendment to that same council's government plan. But the sentiment of the Senator's proposal in relation to the COVID-19 borrowing is broadly aligned to the Council's view that debt should be minimised. Given this alignment, I propose to vote in favour of Part 3 of the amendment relating to the COVID-19 and Fiscal Stimulus Fund borrowing. However, sir, I find the remainder of the Senator's amendment in relation to financing the PECRS liability more difficult to support. The refinancing of pension liabilities has been considered on several occasions in the past. A lack of action previously has led to the position we have today, and a liability to the PECRS scheme of almost £350 million. Which will potentially grow further without further action. Now is the time to address this issue and replace the liability with borrowing that can be repaid in a similar timeframe, but at a lower cost. In fact, sir, the full saving in cash terms across both pension schemes, as we have already heard, is £3.6 billion. Possibly worth repeating. £3.6 billion. I know some members are concerned about burdening future generations with debt, but these liabilities already exist and should be dealt with. The proposal in the government plan to do exactly that is fully funded and does not require any increase in taxation or reduction in government services. Whilst the borrowing will be in place for a period of probably 30 to 35 years, it will be repaid at roughly the same time as the current PECRS liability, but at a far lower cost. There are many reasons why I support the refinancing of this existing liability. A, the current interest rate environment is conducive to entering into longer-term borrowing at a fixed cost. B, there is strong investor appetite for the states of Jersey to issue bonds. C, the total level of borrowing proposed at £1.7 billion still only represents approximately 36% of GVA. This is a position that would be the envy of many developed economies. Our key reserves will remain intact to protect the island against any future shocks, whether they be economic, environmental or social. So some members have indicated that they are concerned about the impact that the proposed level of debt will have on states' credit ratings. Total debt is only one factor considered by rating agencies. They are just as focused on the support provided by our investment reserves, the economic outlook for the island, and our ability to service the costs of borrowing. Whilst maintaining a strong credit rating is important, the credit rating itself is the output of an assessment of our balance sheet and the island's economic outlook. I do not believe that the borrowing proposed in this government plan will lead to significant changes in Jersey's credit rating. So Senator Gorst is concerned about generations of Jersey people being saddled with a legacy of debt. I prefer to take a more optimistic outlook on that observation and see this as an unburdening of future generations of liabilities, which successive governments have failed to tackle. This Council of Ministers has been brave, but sensible in its determination of the right level of borrowing for Jersey. And this is presented in the government plan. I am unable to support this part of the amendment from Senator Gorst, and I would urge other members to reject it too. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Please, any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I, along with my colleagues in the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, support Senator Gorst in his amendment. Personally, I only regret that he did not seek to limit the necessity for borrowing that was offered in the amendment to the hospital funding issue, but we are where we are, as they say. Senator Gorst is quite right that this amendment, this borrowing proposition from the Alliance government that we are asked to support today requires a great deal more consideration because there is no plan B. We have heard from the Minister just now how she considers that this is, well, she prefers a more optimistic outlook upon her proposition to the Assembly today. And she considers that 36% of GVA borrowings would be the envy of many other developed economies. But of course, we have a long history of much, much smaller levels of debt. And it is her and her alliance government who have taken us away, or are trying to steer us away from that long and well-trodden path that has brought us the financial stability that we have enjoyed for many, many decades and even centuries. Sir, if I may refer members to the excellent advisors report to the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, page 138, the advisor states, "What policymakers in Jersey, however, should note is that borrowing, including prudent borrowing, is a cost to taxpayers and strictly only changes the timing of taxation, not the need for it. In the formal argot of economics, borrowing represents an intertemporal preference about the timing of tax bills, not a mechanism for avoiding them." So we've already heard from the Treasury Minister that she considers the next government will need to increase taxes to cover the spending of this government. As our economic advisor points out there, future governments will then be faced with further decisions to increase taxation to pay for this level of borrowing. So it's not one tax bill coming down the track, it is potentially two, and unless members implement some restraint and support the amendment that is before us now. So as the debate continues, I would hope that other members of the government will be able to express perhaps what the plan B is, as the Treasury Minister has so far failed to do so. Thank you, sir.
Much. Senator Mezek.
Thank you, sir. And in the interests of balance, with my contribution to this debate, I intend to upset the proposer and the Treasury Minister equally with the position that I'll take, although the Treasury Minister may find some commiseration in the fact that I will be voting with her at the end of this debate. And I guess we had a bit of an inkling that this debate would be coming based on the contribution to the debate from Senator Gorst in the hospital financing proposition recently. In fact, sir, there were a few of us who were sat wondering if he was going to break ranks in that debate and perhaps end up voting for the scrutiny amendments to the hospital funding proposition on the basis that there is, I would suggest, a degree of sense in the position philosophically that he's taken, and which I think he summed up with one sentence in his opening speech, which I made a note of, where he said the move from low levels of debt in Jersey to extremely high levels is a risk. And there's absolutely no doubt that that is a risk. You cannot go on borrowing forever. At some point, that becomes unsustainable. It will reduce confidence in the government's ability to finance its day-to-day business and pay back the debt that it's taken on. It cannot go on forever. And so you have to be smart about how you choose to borrow and what you choose to borrow it for. And that's why I find some inconsistency then in wanting to hold back our ability now to borrow some money to pay off another debt, which in the long run is actually better value for money. When instead, we have borrowed more than we need to for the hospital and more than we need to for the government office. I told you, sir, I would be balanced in who I tried to upset with my remarks in this speech. And that is a position that I think risks our ability to be financially prudent in the future when we finance the projects that will be fundamental to our well-being as a community over the coming decades. And by that, I mean the prospect of having to borrow money to fund our carbon neutral ambitions, not just because it's a morally responsible thing to be carbon neutral, but because there is infrastructure we may well have to fund to secure our well-being in the future, whether that's flood defences from rising tides or whether it's energy efficiency in homes. We may want to borrow money to be able to deliver that. The fact that we're in a housing crisis and to fund the building of homes upfront usually requires a substantial amount of debt. Our ability to take on that debt and to pay it back sustainably is undermined when we have such large levels of unnecessary debt. And that is where I think that both the proposer and the government have got the wrong position on this. Debt is not a bad thing. In fact, many households base their entire security on debt in the form of a mortgage. Taking on debt can be a good thing so long as you're taking it on to pay for the things that you need and you have a sustainable way of funding it. And Senator Gorst talked about his worries about our ability to pay back debt in the future. And I couldn't help but wonder, based on some of what he said and some of what has come from members of the government, whether they're intended on ultimately walking us down austerity avenue again, where the only way to pay back the large amounts of debt we've taken on, they will claim will be to cut back public services, because heaven forbid we might look at our tax system and try to rebalance that fairly so that we've got an appropriate amount of income coming in to pay for our public services and to pay back the debts, hopefully the good debts we'll have taken on to pay for those things that we need. And we take on very substantial amounts of debt. I think the scrutiny panel made the case very well in the hospital funding debate, taking on more than we needed. We're taking on tens of millions of pounds of debts to pay for an office block that we won't even own at the end of it, being delivered by a private developer rather than our own developer who are too busy borrowing money to build homes that nobody can afford. So I think that our management of debt in the island is poor, but what Senator Gorst is proposing at this point actually, in my view, represents imprudency, and therefore I won't be voting to support it.
Very much. Connie Tarbison.
Thank you, sir. And I'm sure members will be delighted that I'm not going to bang on about actuarial calculations. But firstly, the first comment I'd like to make is about where we are in terms of the interest rate cycle. As I'm sure everyone will know, we've been in a low interest rate environment for an incredibly long time, an historically long time. However, the outlook is not quite as rosy as what we've had in the past. Inflation is starting to move up again, and in fact in the US inflation has hit record levels. So looking forward, the picture is not quite as good as it will be going past. It is at the moment. So the first risk in accepting my esteemed minister's proposal is the cost of borrowing will probably move upwards, not downwards. So the cost of funding the PECS liability could well become more expensive, which frankly, given that we have the opportunity to do something about this now or sometime in 2023, would be a shame, frankly. Secondly, talking about the PECS scheme, and I'm sure Senator Gorst knows this, PECS is a closed scheme. As far as I'm aware, and if we are taking people into the scheme, I should be very cross. We are not taking any more people and we're not building up any more PECS liability. This is not true, in fact, of the teacher scheme, where we continue to take people into that scheme, despite the fact that it is our most expensive scheme, and that liability is quite likely to increase. However, reducing that liability and accepting the Senator's proposition still remains a good idea. I think the other point I would like to make is, and I'm sure the Treasury Minister made this very eloquently, we owe this money. This is not new debt we're taking on. The money is owed to the scheme, and currently we are paying somewhere in the region of 5% of that debt. And as I'm sure members will be aware, and as will have seen in the comment paper, what's being proposed in the government plan is the opportunity to refinance this debt at half that cost, and that effectively, if you do a simple calculation, could reduce our costs by some £8 million a year in terms of interest costs. Now, that to me seems to be a sensible way forward, given that the money that's saved there could be used for other things. So essentially, the reducing, as we said in the comments paper, there is a possibility that doing this will save the taxpayer between now and 2053 some £260 million. Now, that's a lot of money. So I think, in summarising, what I want to say is we're not increasing our liabilities by doing this. We're simply reducing the borrowing costs. And there has been some mention about Standard & Poor's and perhaps risking our credit rating by doing this. However, I think if you take a wider look at Jersey's ability to repay, we have a strong finance industry, and it's remained strong throughout the pandemic. Our tax take remains good, and therefore our ability to repay debt remains strong. And if we do borrow the money we said we're going to borrow for the hospital, we must not forget that this is not just we aren't creating a huge exposure of 850 million. Set against that, we have assets of a similar amount. So essentially, whilst we're borrowing that, we always have the option of selling those assets and repaying that debt if times become more difficult. So it's not a simple picture. It's not as simple a picture as is being painted. So from my mind, this is a sensible time to do this. We need to reduce the cost of borrowing this money. We also need to put the money back into the scheme because we owe it. So I will be supporting. I will be not be supporting, unfortunately, Senator Gorst's first two-part proposal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Commentator. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. It's the psychology of these debates, not just the words that are spoken, that fascinate me, right down to the Freudian slip we had there by the previous speaker. That's why I'm opposing Senator Gorst. And what a strange world it is that we live in, when in fact it's one of the minister's own colleagues who is bringing something that is fundamentally opposed to the government's own stance on this. But not just any minister, but a senior minister, and one who no doubt still has pretensions of wanting to be the next chief minister after the next election. So it is correct that when the Treasury Minister says it might seem strange that another minister is bringing an amendment to his own government. Yes, it is strange. It's very strange, and it's one that should be noteworthy, because when it comes to lesser ministers, they're not even allowed to think freely nowadays, even on minor amendments that they would wish to support, because there is a government whip, but clearly the government whip doesn't apply to the minister in question, presumably because he's too strong to tame. He does say in his comments, in the comments paper towards the end, that he has been consistent in his stance on debt. Indeed, he has. He's been consistently wrong in his stance on taking on new debt. This isn't like an A-level maths exam where you get points for being consistently wrong as long as you follow your workings through. Unfortunately, politics doesn't work like that. And as Senator Mezek has really covered a lot of the main points here, and he mentioned that good and bad debt. So, for example, there are things that the government needs to fund, and it can do so from a strong position when it has money in the bank. And I like to think of it in the sense that we're not taking on debt because we don't have any money. We're taking on debt because we do have money, and we can therefore borrow at cheap rates. And I think that's good economics, and it's good economics that applies across the board, whether you're on the left, in the centre, or on the right. But for some reason, I think that Senator Gorst seems to have a pathological disagreement with borrowing in any circumstances, it would seem, or certainly in many circumstances. And forgive me if I'm wrong here, sir, but it seems very simple to me. This debt already exists. It's not as if we're taking on a new debt. The debt is there. So this talk about saddling future generations with more debt is simply nonsense, because it's a pre-existing debt, and we simply have the choice today as to whether we pay that debt back at a high interest rate or at a low interest rate. And you don't need to be an economist, you don't even need to be an accountant or a rocket scientist to know which one we should be doing. It seems obvious that if you had a credit card and you owed £10,000 on that, and you couldn't afford to pay it back straight away, and the interest rate was 19%, you might want to take a consolidated loan that you could afford to pay back at only 5 or 6%, and you'd save money in the long term. It seems to me that's the kind of principle we're doing today. And I do remember having a conversation early on, I think it was in this term, it may have even been in a previous term, with the now Chief Minister about this, and I was saying, well, you know, why are we not doing this now? It would save us money. It seems the obvious thing to do, and I'm pleased that this is being brought forward by this government, and credit where credit's due, I think. Let's look at the financial implications, because this is another serious issue here. So we've got a complete conflict between the financial implications that are put forward by Senator Gorst. I say a complete conflict, it's certainly very selective in its wording. Senator Gorst says this amendment will reduce the borrowing in this government plan by 345 million, and it will pay back 259 million of debt within a shorter time frame. But of course that only focuses on what he sees as the positives, because of course we have what I would call the real story being told to us in the comments paper, which says that the refinancing of the Pecca's debt is forecast to save £260 million by 2053, £150 million in real terms. So what we've got here is we have a former Chief Minister who's advocating racking up an extra £260 million of extra spending, additional spending that has to be paid by future and current generations, and that's £150 million in real terms that will be lost if we vote for Senator Gorst's proposal. And that's why I think we find ourselves in a very strange position where both the opposition, if we are to call ourselves that, and the government find ourselves in agreement because we want to save future generations money. Senator Gorst, for some reason, because of his pathological fear of all debt being bad, wants to cost future generations £260 million. And remember that figure, because Senator Gorst, with his invisible party, is going to be coming around asking for your vote in the far eastern bloc. He'll be knocking on some of the doors with his invisible party colleagues throughout the whole island, saying, isn't it terrible that this government and even the opposition just want to spend your money profligately, and we want to save you money? But that isn't true. Senator Gorst wants to make sure that you pay more money on servicing debts at a higher interest rate. And who benefits from that? Well, who's lent us this money? They're going to be getting that extra £260 million, not the Jersey taxpayer. I say this isn't the right thing to do. It should be opposed, and there's a reason that most of the Assembly are united in this opinion, sir.
Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. Senator Gorst, I think, makes a lot of very, very sophisticated arguments, which initially, when you consider them, have a lot of offer some positives. And indeed, I can see why that there may be members who will be attracted to them. The idea that, if you like, a reaction to a higher level of debt than we've ever seen before. We've seen some of the letters in the JUP and articles how, you know, we've broken with the past and broken the Jersey mould and so on, in terms of not borrowing and prided ourselves. But of course, the end result of that has been that we've ended up with an archaic and collapsing public infrastructure in so many areas. We are having to make a decision to invest huge sums of money in a hospital because our health estate has been allowed to lapse into total a situation where it's no longer at all possible to keep it going. We did the same with our housing estate until the wisdom of borrowing and making an investment into putting the estate right of Anzium saw the sense, and thankfully we've been able to emerge from that time. And of course we face other major issues. There's no question we are in a housing crisis. Personally, I believe, and a crisis of affordability. I've said that, and I personally believe that it will be necessary in the future, as we look to the years ahead, to invest very significant sums of public money. But it's right that borrowing is not bad as long as it's for investment. Borrowing for spending and day-to-day spend is bad. But this is intended, the government plan is about investment. And of course, the argument that Senator Gorst advances is, well, if we don't repay this public employees pension fund pension debt, which is Deputy Teddy's got, we've had for years. If we don't repay that, an opportunity when it's possible to do so on the most favourable financial terms that I can ever recall in life, having had a mortgage at 16% in the past, and people just, don't even dream that. But we're told these terms are fixed, they are good. But of course, Senator, of course, raises the possibility, well, with all these other risks of all these other potential unknowns of what capital investment, we need the flexibility. Now, so I think, though, clearly, I think Deputy Tadier is absolutely right. How can we ignore what we're told here is that to repay a loan that we've already got under an arrangement which is massively financially advantageous over a long term, even £150 million in real term values, which presumably is some sort of discounted cash flow calculation. So my view is, well, I asked this question, it must be right, surely, to repay that loan, but I would very much like to see that £150 million saving appropriated somewhere in the accounts for these other areas where, and indeed, as Senator Mezek has absolutely said, as a contribute towards, as a help us with our carbon neutral programme, which I very much hope that will gain the state support and will be in the hands of future assemblies and future governments to how fast they can go. And of course, picking up from the situation we're in on housing and in other areas of public investment that we definitely need to do, to have that earmarked there in some way would, I believe, be a help. So I think sir, I am having thought what possible advantages there was against the major disadvantages. I am not going to support it. Thank you.
Very much. Deputy Ash.
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to talk long on this because I think Deputy Young has just covered many of the points.
I was trying to get hold of Claire, actually.
Hello, Claire. Yeah. How are you? Are we all right again, sir? Has Claire?
Well, I don't know, Deputy. Have you finished chatting to the other people online? Please do continue. Yes.
Yes, it was. I could have broken into a little bit of Gilbert and Sullivan. O'Sullivan, not Anne Sullivan.
Yes.
There, but I won't, sir. But no, just to reiterate really what Deputy Young said, we have got tremendous funds. We've got tremendous assets in the island, and that is a tribute to past administrations, and I think we should acknowledge that. And I know Senator Gorst often does. But in doing that, sir, we have a sport and leisure complex in Fort Regent that is almost beyond repair. We have a hospital that is becoming increasingly unfit for purpose, and we're assured by 2026 it will be. So we have to cover that. We have pension liabilities. We had a government building that was, again, not fit for purpose and is now needing replacement. We had social housing that was, to be quite honest, an absolute disgrace. Fortunately, though, that element of it has been replaced in my own area of St Clement and is now very pleasant, and we are now attempting to renovate that. So in building up these funds, we have put a tremendous amount of issues upon ourselves. We now have a chance, as the Constable of St Juan said, to remedy that. We have a chance to remedy it by borrowing at all-time low rates. And if we don't do that, in 10 years' time, people could look back and say, well, we've got this pension liability. Why don't we borrow? Why don't we borrow at 8%? Because that's where we could end up. I was watching a fund manager the other day, a top American chap on one of the breakfast programs, where he feels inflation is now going to run ahead of interest rates. That is to say, we could have interest rates at 8%, inflation running at 10 or 12. So while we have this chance to borrow at these rates, I think for future generations, we would be letting them down badly if we don't cover that pension liability now. I think the COVID debt is a different issue, and we can look at that, and I would advise the Senator to take them separately. But the pension debts, we have a chance to close that out now, and I think we'll be doing a tremendous job for future generations in the island, as well as saving considerable amounts of money. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. When Senator Gorst was speaking, he was saying that other alternatives to the pension debt haven't been explored. And he explained some of the things that happened in the past. And he mentioned, for example, that it was partly refunding previously was partially financed by increasing the contribution rates made by teachers. And they also did away with the final salary scheme. Now, is he proposing to increase contribution rates to the teachers when we have enough trouble trying to recruit them anyway? And is it fair that he does so? Or is he proposing that the government will renege on its pension commitments to previous employees? Again, which would be, in my view, a despicable thing to do. So basically, I will be supporting the government on this issue and not Senator Gorst, because Senator Gorst hasn't always got things right. In the past, if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the members who was arguing that we should balance the budget every single year. So in other words, there shouldn't be a surplus and there shouldn't be a deficit. And anyone who's studied economics will tell you you balance over the economic cycle. And this is what we have been doing because the states have in the past seen sense and followed the advice of the Fiscal Policy Panel. And even on this topic, in the Fiscal Policy Panel's latest report, they say the fiscal framework sets a guidance that government should borrow only to finance investment or refinance liabilities, except under times of economic duress, and monitor the impact on net financial assets. On this basis, therefore, the panel's view is that the plan to borrow to refinance existing liabilities, provide support during economic duress, and finance investment through our hospital project is appropriate. Now, I am grateful that we actually set up the fiscal policy panel and for the advice they've been giving us, because they were external to this island, and anyone who raises issues like this in the island normally gets poo-pooed and put down. We've got leading economists advising us, and I think we should take their advice. Now, I'm also of the view that interest rates are at a very, very low level, and it makes economic sense to do so. Now, Senator Gorst also mentioned, oh, taxes may go up next year. Well, he doesn't want this to go through at the moment because he may be putting up taxes. Well, sorry, let me put it this way. I don't necessarily believe that this will lead to taxes going up next year. There may be other things that will crop up that could lead to taxes going up. And if they do go up, they've got to be fair across the board, not the usual pile it on the middle ground of Jersey. So we know that those on income support get protection. Those who are very wealthy can afford it and avoid tax anyway, because they don't pay tax on their investments. They pay it on their income. And we've even capped that. So don't listen to threats about, oh, taxes may go up in the future. We'll have to see what the future brings. And then we need to see how we address those tax things. But what I will say is borrowing at this moment in time is a sensible economic choice. And I will support the government on this measure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak. Senator Valois.
Yes, thank you, sir. A little trepidation in speaking because I've worked in finance previously, and I understand, having been a former Assistant Minister at Treasury, the valuation process of pension funds. And so when we talk about the liability and the debts that are required with regards to the government's position with regards to this amendment, and members talking about the pros and cons about getting the debt now, actually on the books. And when I look at the responsibilities around PECCS in particular, you know, there's a whole framework that's set out about our responsibilities and our liabilities with regards to that. And I do wonder whether the arguments that are being made around the sum that's required for the borrowing is prudent in considering the valuation process that's taken place. And I'm quite shocked that within the government plan and the expected borrowing that's required for these pension funds, that we've had no kind of independent formulation of response from those committees that are asked to carry out these types of pieces of work. And I say that, sir, because actually, when we're talking about the liabilities, PECCS is an example because I've done a little bit further work on that and looking at the agreement that was in place for it to be paid off by, I think it was 2053, in terms of the framework that was agreed originally. And so I raise these questions now because I don't think every single member will necessarily understand everything that we're talking about in terms of the fund situation and what that means in terms of liabilities and process, in terms of funding that position that we have as a government and as a responsible employer to our former employees for their pensions. And I think that's a really important point to make, because the members that I've heard so far maybe have understanding and knowledge in this area, but this is something that we all have to understand and ensure that we're not actually creating a further and higher liability for our younger generations going forward in terms of lending, borrowing by the state. And I want absolute understanding, and I'm sure many others would like absolute understanding of that, in terms of the fact that even though it's been mentioned it's on the balance sheet, it's not actually in debt form. And therefore, what we're creating is a debt form by agreeing this pension liability. Thank you, sir.
Do you have a point of order, Deputy Young?
Yes, I'm sorry, sir. I think Senator Vara's speech has prompted me to just raise a point with you, having already spoken, which obviously the technicalities of this amendment concerns the a financial transaction involving the Public Employee Pension Fund. I should have addressed, sir, as one of many thousands of pensioners in that scheme. I do therefore potentially have a conflict of interest, sir. I would welcome you to advise me whether or not I need to abstain on this, because I think Senator Vara has highlighted the fact. The reason why I asked her now is because I had assumption I make.
On one level, Deputy, this is an interest that many people share, but more significantly, it seems to me that this is about how an existing liability is funded. It doesn't change the liability to the individual members, and therefore individual members, I don't think, have any particular interest in the outcome as members. And therefore, I don't think you have any difficulty in continuing to participate. Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Chief Minister.
Sir, members will be delighted, and I think I've shortened my speech quite considerably, but I think it is just recapping, and I just want to check something, sir, as I can do anything in response to, I think that's the summary, sir. And actually, sir, I'm delighted to, and in the slightly incongruous position, sir, of agreeing once with Senator Gorst, which is in saying that this is a very important position, but actually, and it does happen on occasion, I'm complimenting Senator Mesic and Deputy Tadier and other members who I think have actually got it spot on in terms of what we are trying to do. Won't say on the office financing, I think that's a different thing, I'll shake my head at that point, but in terms of what we're trying to do on the pension side, there is an existing liability, and it falls between two funds. One is a very long-term position, and that does not seem to be in discussion, and that will save 3.4 billion if the government plan is approved and we can get the financing in the right place. And that is a huge sum of money, and therefore it dwarfs the sum of money that we're actually debating at the moment, which is in the order of 260 million pounds. However, sir, I suspect for everybody involved in this debate, 260 million pounds is also a considerable sum of money, and that size should not be overlooked. And the very simplistic point is, sir, that liability is there. It is absolutely true. It will go from a liability that we presently owe to, I will say, an arm's length body. I'm not using the technical decision. It's a separate body run by the Committee of Management. And I can confirm I met with the chair of that committee, who is certainly raised no concerns at all of the proposals. In fact, on one of the funds, they are very keen to actually receive the funding. And so, sir, and basically what we are doing in the same way as anybody with a mortgage who may have locked in at high rates in the past, we're going to take the opportunity with these historically low rates to refinance them and reap the benefits. And the point there, sir, I will say, someone somewhere suggested in the debate about not having any plans to repayment other than using the reserves. What I will say, sir, is twofold. Obviously, one, we would hope we can borrow between 2 and 2.5%. That is significantly below the returns of the reserves that we see. Secondly, sir, already in the plan, in the finances of the government, we pay 5% on this money. And so the reason we haven't, if you like, banked that that benefit is number one is actually from prudence to make sure that actually we nail that down, and obviously that's very much subject to the agreement of the Assembly today. But also, sir, until one actually gets that loan in place, then one will know, be able to quantify those amounts. And to an extent, sir, actually, that means that the benefit can then be determined by future councils of ministers and future assemblies. And so, yes, it is looking long term. It is looking several, many years ahead in certain instances. And I just want to put that into perspective. Many members will know, it's wearing a different hat. I still remain a trustee on the housing trusts locally, honorary trustee. And in 1989, this assembly granted that trust a loan, in essence, which had to be repaid back over 25 years. And yes, with various things that happened, I think it was ultimately repaid. It had been a couple of years later. The point was, I was the one we gave that last cheque to Senator Gorst in his capacity as Chief Minister to mark the end of what actually created the issues, as created the reason for that loan, and for actually showing that that particular estate was debt-free. And the point I make, sir, is although 30 years may feel a long time, it actually comes quicker than we would all like. And so, sir, it is absolutely conceivable that future members sitting in here in those years to come may well be wondering why on earth this assembly missed the opportunity, if it supported, for example, parts 1 and 2 of Senator Gorst's amendment, missed the opportunity to grasp that nettle and lock in those savings when it had a very clear opportunity to do so. And I think that's a fundamental issue, is that we often have not looked long term. We've not taken what sometimes can be perceived as difficult decisions, but actually certain members who've actually showed the simplicity of the argument, I think, have put that argument across exceptionally well. This is not a new liability. It has been with us for a long time, and this is the right time to address that and to refinance that and to reduce that long-term liability to future generations. Because if not, that long-term liability will get more expensive and will get greater. So I just want to have a look at one or two remarks, having completely skipped my speech. The other point I would make, actually, in terms of, and it is a matter for future council ministers, in terms of addressing, actually a comment by Deputy Young. In the various proposals we have put together in terms of dealing with debt, we have the COVID debt, we have the hospital debt, and we have this liability, the pre-87 pension debt. Over the next 30 years, the pre-87 pension debt will save approximately, from memory, £300 million. Obviously, it doesn't come off in an even cycle, so it won't all happen in day one, obviously, and it doesn't all happen in year 30 either. And indeed, the profile is in the government plan. The COVID debt, and we do support the third part of Senator Gorst's amendment, which is basically building on various discussions we've had within the council ministers. The point there, sir, is that the COVID debt, which is at present estimated to be a maximum of 209 million, the position or the steps we took was to where, and this assembly has approved, was the switch from the prior year basis to the current year basis. That is estimated to generate somewhere around £340 million from memory. So that is a significant amount higher than I've said conservatively 80 million. People who do the maths and what I've just said will note that that is higher. The if you take 340 less 209, and if we reduce that debt through some of the measures that Senator Gorst has identified, that amount that will be raised over the years to come will again stand to benefit future council ministers, and as far, certainly to my knowledge, it has not been banked in our particularly in our future projections. It obviously is illustrated in the reserve projections. And the point I'm saying there, sir, is we have given several options over and above the repayment of the suggested loans through the returns on the reserves, that there will be additional sums of money coming in over that period of that loan term, which can be used to either boost reserves or for alternative measures, or not to, or can be used for alternative issues that the then Assembly and the then council ministers so decide. For me, the fact, going back to the particular elements that we were talking about, which in particular is parts 1 and 2 of this debate, the fact that this will leave the next generation of islanders £260 million better off by 2053 in cash terms is huge. Put that in perspective, it's equivalent of more than 5.5 times the building cost of the new Lekeneve school, which opened, I think, last year, sir. And I think that does very much encapsulate the challenge, and actually the reason that to date many speakers have supported not voting for parts 1 and parts 2. There are 2 issues I'd like to address, or 2 comments I'd like to make, sir. I know there's been a suggestion in the scrutiny report, actually, sir, which would be that if interest rates went up, the amount that would be borrowed would be much lower. Actually, sir, it will depend on the circumstances, because if interest rates have gone up, you could still end up paying more interest in absolute terms, even though it's on a lesser capital amount. It depends on the circumstances. And so, sir, I'm always reminded of a quote which used to get used at me many times in the Assembly at various points, which was, the enemy of a good plan is the dream of a perfect plan. And I think what we've got here, sir, at the moment, I believe we've got a good plan, and I believe we've got a good overall plan, but in this instance, in terms of how we are dealing with the pension liability, I think Senator Gorst, with the greatest respect, is in search of a perfect plan, and I don't think that should be supported. The alternative, sir, is the old expression of a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. And sir, the bird in the hand is that we can see the cost of not doing this at £260 million, and we should seize the opportunity, be decisive, and address that level of liability whilst we can, sir. And actually, the delays of waiting another year, it's just do sound like let's put off and not make a decision today. I go back, sir, to my analogy of the Lekeneve school, and I would invite members to think about those pupils in that school and their peers amongst our younger generations. And in 30 years' time, as I said, sir, new Assembly members could be some of those students. They may well sit right here in this chamber and look back at the decisions of previous assemblies, and will they see that we decisively seized what is a historic opportunity, leaving them a windfall of millions of pounds? Or will they observe that we dithered and deferred this decision, missing our chance to utilise the low interest rates before us, and leaving them to then have to work out how to pay off our debt? And that is why, sir, I very much urge members to consider the long term, vote to leave future generations better off, reject parts 1 and 2 of this amendment, and we are happy, sir, that the government is supporting part 3, sir. Thank you, sir, and I'm not taking any points of clarification.
Won't take any point of clarification. Going to Hubbardston, John.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak, but I'm minded to, following some correspondence I had with a parishioner who wrote to me saying, please think very carefully about how future generations will repay the mountain of debt you are considering. And if that doesn't concern you, First, having to pay interest as well as capital repayments before you can spend anything you want to do locally out of a diminishing pot. I'll remind members what Senator Gore said. He said it was not reasonable, it was not sensible, and it was not prudent, and that there was insufficient detail. And we just heard from the Chief Minister that it depends. If interest rate goes up, it depends the level of debt. We heard from Senator Volwar and we heard from Deputy Higgins about the cycle, the economic cycle, which is really important. And Senator Volwar spoke about the valuation of the pension debt. Senator Gorst is asking us to pause and review and to quantify the risks. And I think that's quite sensible. We heard some quotes just now. I like quotes as well, sir. Living within your means, and if you can't afford it, don't get it. I was worried about the hospital debt, and even though the Constable of St Wands, my friend from St Wands, says we can now sell the hospital to raise the funds, that worries me even further. But the other saying I like is, if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. So at this time, I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak on the amendment? Deputy St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak, but I'll just say a few words. I did mention during the hospital debate that we're borrowing money and using our investments to pay off that borrowing, and I pointed out to members then, as we will all have heard if we see the adverts on television, that investments can go up as well as down, and there's no guarantee that our investments will continue to pay off that level of borrowing, and if that's the case, we then have to find it from somewhere else. As Senator Gore said at the beginning, sir, money can be cheap, money can be expensive, but whether it's one or the other, it's still money that has to be paid off. And it's returns, it's servicing, the coupon, whatever it is that needs to be found. £1 billion worth in one financial year is what we're, the government, aiming to borrow. But the reason I want to just say this, sir, is Chief Minister's made a big play about the best time to borrow. And I just found myself thinking, why does one borrow in the first place? And as much as I don't like borrowing, it's very tempting to think, oh, the money's cheap, let's borrow it. But actually, one borrows because you accept that you have to pay more to buy yourself time, or you accept that you have to pay more because it allows you to do something else, which in the long run ends up being beneficial. And so I say to members, as strange as it may be, do not be lured by this Alliance government telling you that cheap money is the best answer, because if it allows you time to get through the crisis we have at the moment, COVID, Brexit, climate change, all these sort of things, if it allows us time to get through to a situation where we're better placed to service that level of borrowing, surely it's the right move. Members will remember in my farming career, I did lots of things: vegetables, flowers, dairy farming, oysters, mussels. My last enterprise, which added to all the big list, was free-range egg production. And if I'd worked on the basis that my 8,000 chickens were going to produce the same number of eggs this year, next year, and the year after, I would have been out of business pretty quickly, sir. I just go back to investments go up as well as down. But I finish with these words, sir. I ask members to think very carefully. Cheap money is very, very tempting, but it's still money that has to be repaid. And sometimes you're better off to pay a little bit more over a longer period of time and use that time to best effect to get over other crises that you may have. I'm going to vote with Senator Gorst. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy, does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak. Senator Farnham.
Thank you, sir. I just want to make a very quick point, and other members have alluded to it. It's just to point out again that in relation to the pre-1987 Pecker's debt, it's a debt we already own. And the states have on at least 2 previous occasions. And I remember, because one was on the back of an amendment lodged by myself, I think in 2013, have agreed in principle to deal with this. And somewhat ironically, had we have taken this step a number of years ago, we would be in a significantly stronger position with it now. So it's not about, in this instance, acquiring new debt. It's about finding a more efficient and a less expensive way of repaying that debt. And I just wanted to push that point across. I completely understand Senator Gorst's position on this. He has always been prudent in fiscal matters, and we are generally aligned. But I think on this one, it's certainly in our long-term interests to find a more prudent way of dealing with the debt, with this liability that we already have. The only real difference is if we take a loan out to clear that and service it at a much lower cost, it will appear on our balance sheet. And I think whilst some members have talked about saddling our future generations with debt, sir, I think that it's far better to ensure we protect our cash reserves, because if we face further challenges similar to the challenges we faced with Brexit and the pandemic in the future, then I would argue that we are far better served by having large reserves than having to go and take out debt because we've used our reserves too soon to take out debt in a future world, sir, where doing so would be considerably more expensive than it is now. So I just ask members to bear that in mind, sir. But the crux, the point I'm making is we do already own that liability. We're just finding a better way of servicing it. Thank you.
Dunstable, you have a question for the Attorney General?
Thank you, sir, and apologies, I should have perhaps asked the Attorney General at an earlier point in the debate. However, the Senator Farnham just referred to the liability of the pension debt, and I thought it might be helpful, particularly following your ruling earlier, if the Attorney General could inform the Assembly of where exactly the liability of this debt does rest. Is it with the states and the public purse, or is it actually with those beneficiaries, the debt?
Is Mr. Attorney General or the Solicitor General online? I'll look through and see if I can see.
So yes, I'm present.
Thank you very much. Mr. Attorney, are you able to assist the Assembly, or do you need a little more time?
Sir, I would need quite significant more time. I'm not aware of the factual details in relation to this particular debt, so I would need to find out what those arrangements were.
Well, I think if we continue with the debate, it may be that the attorney members will have to determine whether they need the attorney's advice before they can vote, or the matter can proceed without the benefit of that advice if the attorney cannot come back to us within a time before the debate closes.
It may be, sorry, it may be that if Treasury officials could send me relevant details, that would assist me in looking at the question. But sir, I would need to have those details before I can attempt to answer it.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Well, if no other member wishes to speak on the amendment, then it doesn't sound like we're going to have the opportunity of reverting before the matter closes. and the question cannot therefore be answered by the Attorney General.
Sir,
I wonder if anyone who has not yet spoken is in a position to give the information required. I suppose if it is simply a question of obtaining information,
Sir, I wonder, well, either the Chief Minister can address it or I can seek to address it in my summing up.
I think the sensible course is for you to address it in your summing up, Senator Gorse, because I don't think well, the Chief Minister has already spoken. I was thinking if we could make some kind of ability to give clarification, but I think the matter's passed. So if no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Senator Gorse to respond.
Thank you, sir. My understanding in answer to the Senator's question, sir, is that as part of the 10-point plan, which of course the Chief Minister will remember as well, because a lot of this was happening whilst he was the Assistant Minister in Treasury. Seems a long time ago now, sir, but not quite 30 years. That we brought forward the requirements to settle these debts, even though it was the pre-87 debt. It took a long time to get it agreed and sorted out, that the liability is with the employer. The liability is with the employer. I purposefully, sir, in my opening comments, didn't get into all of the technicalities around the pension, because some members have said things today about the pension which seemed perhaps to not quite understand this liability. But if we get dragged down that rabbit hole, I fear what is already a potentially long session is going to be even longer. For example, a member said that Peckers is close to new members. Of course, that's quite right, but this is an agreed way of dealing with previous service liabilities all rolled up, and the way that the liability or the payment required of the employer to the scheme is connected with current number of employees. That's just in the calculation. It's not connected, as I understand it, with the actual number in the scheme, because rightly it's closed. And that's one of the reasons why this amount is greater than it was previously and has grown in the way that it has. So we've had a lot of conversation, a lot of contributors saying it should have been done earlier, but actually actions of previous governments and this government in increasing the number of employees has led to a growth in the required payment by the employee into the scheme. Other contributors have seemed perhaps not even to have read the amendment or the comment, because this has got nothing to do with teachers. We heard a contributor suggesting that they wanted to support teachers. This is not about the teacher scheme. I fully support the changes that are proposed in the government plan to the teachers scheme, because that was the 3.4 billion balloon payment, again because it was never dealt with, and previous assemblies, when Treasury ministers have tried to deal with it, haven't dealt with it. It is not straightforward the way that this money is currently presented under the state's balance sheet, and that is why this amendment is saying and asking us to consider, and I'm quite clear on my view, whether it is right to take it from how it's currently regarded in the balance sheet how it's currently regarded in the balance sheet, and I'm not sure that everyone in this debate has fully understood that either, with an external debt that's raised to cover it. It might be if more work is undertaken. And we heard from my good constable, who I think is probably up the hill from where I'm sitting now, sir, that his view was we should simply do it because money is cheap. And that is perfectly legitimate. Money is cheap, so we should do it. But there are lots of other things and projects and pressures that the government faces that we could use that argument for, but we're not. And we recognise that the overall level of debt on the government balance sheet is important, and it is important that it is mitigated to the largest extent possible. We even heard somebody suggesting that I was not in favour of borrowing, despite being one of my governments that brought forward the borrowing for the Andium provision. So sometimes history can help us, sometimes it can hinder us if we are not fully understanding it or reviewing it appropriately. And I do just want to, I think somebody also tried to indicate that they knew what my intentions were either at the election or post the election. I hope it's clear to everyone, sir, that I am thoroughly enjoying my current job. And I'll leave it in response to that individual who I know was simply trying to cause trouble and win votes. That's what debate's all about, to make that observation. But the leader of the Reform Party, Sir, made some observations which I would ask him to consider carefully. And I think he indicated that he might be in favour of borrowing for capital infrastructure for the carbon neutral programme. He might be interested in borrowing for affordable purchase schemes and the purchase of land to deliver new housing. And of course, he's right. None of us, as we sit here, know whether they will be of such magnitude that we might want to borrow. And that leads me, and I would have thought that it would lead him as well, to recognise that you can't borrow up to the maximum when you have other issues which need to be addressed, that the next government will no doubt say are legacy issues that this government is being quite clear about. There are some things which, for all sorts of reasons, it hasn't been able to address. Every government, of course, is the same. Is this now absolutely the right time to do this? There is only one argument in favour of doing it now that I think is credible, and that's because borrowing is cheap. But that has never been a sensible argument to borrow. One contributor said, sir, that they thought the FPP were excellent, and they were pleased to read that the FPP supported the government plan. Well, I won't comment on whether FPPs, broadly speaking, support the government plan and have done, and that, I think, shows and gives credit to the officials working particularly in the Economy Department and particularly in the Treasury Department, that they do a good job in understanding the economics as well as the finances of the proposals that they brought forward. But what he did fail to remind us of was that the same FPP that gave support to this government plan, and I disagree in this area, also said that an incoming government would need to raise revenue, would need to raise taxes. So it's not me scaremongering, it's not me wanting to raise contributions, it's not my political philosophy. Of course it's not. It is what the independent fiscal policy panel are saying is the implication of approving this government plan. And I think this amendment, which allows members the appropriate time, remind members that an independent reviewer, advisor to scrutiny said also that more work needed to be done in this regard. It gives members the opportunity to consider that detail and to better understand the fuller implications of COVID on the economy before we remove what in all likelihood would be all flexibility to borrow for anything else, and all flexibility around use of the strategic reserve. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying we should use the strategic reserve, sir, but the strategic reserve is there for a purpose. And we should maintain flexibility to be able to use the strategic reserve for a purpose. But if we have tied ourselves into a position where the only thing we can do is leave the strategic reserve in order for it to grow, which is a good thing, because it's the growth in that reserve that we are using to pay back the borrowing, then we have to be open with the public and acknowledge that that limits and constrains what we can do with the strategic reserve. And that is projected to be required for the next 40 years, whilst we're borrowing for the hospital. And then on top of that, other borrowing that we might need as well. So it's taking away some of the few elements of flexibility that any government has to deal with a crisis. And I don't call that dithering and delay, when what we are being asked to do is a change. I could use a transformation, but it's a pretty big change to the way that we have always run public finances in Jersey. And you can call me a dinosaur, so I'm used to that getting to my age. You can call me a traditionalist. This will be a change to the way that we have always cautiously, prudently, carefully, efficiently run public services. And in fact, most of the criticisms from the public are not that we're not spending enough. It's that we have areas of waste in what we are spending money on. And most of the we have to carefully change that approach. But I recognise, sir, there's a great alignment today between my colleagues in government and the Reform Party. I cannot today make this decision. We in politics are used to being put in a difficult place. That's part of the decision-making process. But it will, for me, sir, be a great disappointment if we jump in today with both feet without, as that independent advisor said, more detail, knowing, as the fiscal policy panel said to us, that this plan as drafted will require tax rises from the next government. I can't do that, sir. I can't do that. Perhaps I'm wrong. I've been wrong in the past. I'll be wrong in the future. All of us, each of us is human. But when I look and think that we stand on the shoulders of giants who were prudent, who ran the government as they ran their farms, and then they ran the government as they ran their legal practices. They ran the government as they ran their hotels. They ran the government as they ran their households. I think it's a mistake to move away from that model because it's served us well. We are not an island of tens of millions of people. We are successful because of our entrepreneurial spirit and the people that choose to call this island home. I don't want to saddle them with this level of debt at this point in time, because the risks to the economy for me are still unknown. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Senator, I'd ask the...
Sir, sorry. Is it possible to ask whether Senator Gorse is prepared to take the vote in?
Yes, thank you very much, Chief Minister.
Thank you.
Senator, do you wish to take
yes,
the entire amendment
sorry, sir, I
together?
should have made it clear. As I've said, I'm grateful to colleagues for supporting parts 1, no, other way round, part 3, but 1 and 2. So if I can take 1 and 2 together, sir,
yes,
and then part 3 separately, thank you.
That's right. It seems to me that 1 and 2 have to be taken together and then part 3 can be taken separately. So I'd ask the greffier to put a vote into the link. The vote is on parts 1 and 2 of the 25th Amendment. And I open the voting and ask members to vote in the normal way. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, ask the greffier to close the voting. Parts 1 and 2 have been defeated. 17 votes pour, 23 votes contre, no abstentions in the link, and a further 3 pour and 3 contre in the chat. In fact, 4 contre if we count the vote just put in. Yes, both sides.
Those members who voted pour: Constable Grouvelle, Deputy of St Martin, Senator Pallett, Senator Valois, Deputy of St Mary, Deputy Ayer, Senator Moore, Constable of St John, Constable of St Lawrence, Senator Gorst, Constable of St Martin, Deputy Morel, Deputy Doublé, Deputy of Grouvelle, Constable of St Brelard, Deputy Lahegre, Deputy Gardner, and in the chat, Senator Ferguson, Constable of St Saviour, and Deputy Masson. And the members who voted contre were Deputy Ward, the Constable of St Juan, Deputy Gida, Deputy Labby, Senator Farnham, Senator Mezek, Deputy Martin, Constable St Helier, Deputy Lewis, Deputy Wickenden, Constable of St Mary, Constable of Trinity, Deputy Young, Constable of St Clement, Deputy of St Peter, Deputy Tadier, Deputy Ash, Deputy Higgins, Deputy Pamplin, the Deputy of Trinity, Deputy Truscott, Deputy Southern, Deputy Alves, and in addition, Senator Lafondre, Deputy Pinnell, and the Deputy of St One.
Very well. We now come to the vote on part 3 of the 25th Amendment, and I ask the greffier to place a vote into the link. Open the voting and ask members to vote in the normal way. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part 3 has been adopted, 33 votes pour, 7 votes contre in the link, and a further 4 votes pour and 2 votes contre in the chat. Both sides, yes?
Those members who voted pour: Constable Greville, Senator Lafondre, Constable St John, Deputy IA, Senator Gorst, Deputy Lewis, Constable of St Juan, Deputy Wickenden, Deputy Labby, Constable of St Lawrence, Senator Valois, Deputy Gardner, Constable of St Martin, Constable of St Helier, Deputy of St Martin, Deputy Morel, Deputy Gida, Deputy Young, Deputy Lehegre, the Constable of Trinity, Deputy Truscott, Deputy Ash, Deputy of St Mary, Deputy of Gruville, Deputy Higgins, Constable of St Brelard, Senator Moore, Senator Pallett, Deputy Martin, Deputy Doublé, Deputy of Trinity, Senator Farnham, Deputy of St Peter, and in the chat, Senator Ferguson, Constable of St Saviour, Deputy Masson, Deputy Pinnell. Those members who voted contre were Deputy Ward, Constable of St Mary, Senator Mezek, Deputy Southern, Deputy Alves, Deputy Pamplin, Deputy Tadier, and in the link, in the chat, sorry, the Deputy of St Juan and the Deputy of St John.
Well, the next amendment listed in the running order is the 3rd amendment lodged by Deputy Southern, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
1, page 2, paragraph C, after the words "of the law," insert the words "except that the proposed transfers from the Health Insurance Fund to the Consolidated Fund shall be reduced to £0 in 2022 in each case, and that the proposed transfer from the Consolidated Fund to the Technology Fund shall be reduced to £7 million in 2022. 2, page 3, paragraph L, after the words "the report," insert the words "except that on page 169 of Appendix 3, after the words "worth of expenditure," there shall be inserted the words "eligibility for the Health Access Scheme shall be expanded to include all those ordinarily resident in the island by 2023, with a proposed funding mechanism to be included in the 2023 government plan, in addition to any further changes to Appendix 3 identified as required by the Council of Ministers." 3, page 3, paragraph L, after the words "to the report," insert the words "except that on page 169 of Appendix 3, after the words "sustainable model for health funding," there shall be inserted the words "but the role of the Health Insurance Fund in meeting the requirement to subsidise the cost of GP consultations and the cost of prescriptions and other primary care services shall be maintained during the review, in addition to any further changes to Appendix 3 identified as required by the Council of Ministers."
Deputy Southern.
Sir, I find it most inconvenient to start now, do 10 minutes and then have to start again tomorrow, sir. I'm in your hands as to whether you wish me to continue tonight and start again tomorrow, because I will have a speech of more than 10 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever we've got. I mean, the House is...
Well, Deputy, it is entirely, I think, open to anyone if they think the business is better organised to propose the adjournment. I don't think it's a matter for the presiding officer. I must keep the business going until 5:30 unless someone makes an application or proposition to adjourn, which is accepted by other.
Could I make that proposition, sir?
Yeah.
So I think it's been made in the chat, actually.
Yes, well, unfortunately, it has to be made. So, very well, a number of people have asked to adjourn. That is seconded, I noticed. Does anyone wish to speak on the question of an adjournment? I would suggest that it is a matter that doesn't need to be spoken upon, but very well. Then in which case I propose to put the matter straight to the vote. I'll do it on the basis of a standing vote. If anyone would indicate in the chat that they did. Deputy Ward, you wish to speak?
So just very briefly, and I know it inconveniences people, but I think, you know, we've got so many debates here that have been really thought through, and the amendments have been put, so much has been put into, and just to have a few minutes at the end of the day because of the way it fits in, I think does inconvenience, particularly in the setup we've got, because we're in the assembly. There's a few people who've come in to present, and many aren't, and I think a bit of leeway at the moment for those sat in the assembly would be very appropriate for the assembly. We start again tomorrow, afresh, and we get through the amendments the best we can. Thank you.
Right, a reasonable stance to take, of course, Deputy Young.
Thanks, sir. Following Deputy Ward, I would like to just briefly say why I proposed. I think, having read through all the papers on this is a very significant matter of public policy regarding the whole development and the futures of our health service in terms of the mechanics of funding. And I think to try and split that up in the way by going ahead and starting the thing now, I think would be a mistake. We should give it proper time tomorrow, sir. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Well, I'm going to take it that you proposed the matter first, as at least as far as I saw it, Deputy Sutton. So do you want to respond? I close the debate, and do you want to respond? Vote. Very well. I will take it as a standing vote. If anyone indicates that they wish a vote to be taken, could they please do so in the chat now? Otherwise, I will take this as a standing vote. Deputy Morell asks for a vote. Could the greffier please place a vote into the link?
I'm sorry, sir. I had just missed the last minute or so. Can I just confirm what we're voting for, please?
We're voting as to whether or not to adjourn immediately and start with Deputy Sutton's amendment first thing tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you.
I open the voting and ask members to vote. I'll register your vote as you presumably wish to vote for, Deputy Sutton? How have we done it? We didn't. Yes. Right. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask greffier to close the voting. Proposition has been adopted, 32 votes pour, 5 votes contre, no abstentions in the link, and a further 5 votes pour in the chat. The Assembly accordingly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.